The evening had dissolved into a blur of whiskey and women. 5 friends spending fistfuls of cash, laughing loud, riding the high of a run the Old West had never seen before. On a whim, they decided to step out of the noise and into a quiet photography studio in Fort Worth. While the photographer adjusted his camera, jackets were straightened and hats were fixed. And when the shutter clicked, there was no urgency in their faces, no sense of danger. They looked like men who believed they were untouchable. None of them knew in that moment that this belief and this photograph would destroy them. By the early 1900s, the Old West was slowly drawing to an end. Sam Bass, Curly Bill Brocious, Billy the Kid, names once synonymous with lawlessness and violence, were already dead. The West was still violent, but it was now no longer tolerant to outlaws as lawmen became more organized. And then there was the Wild Bunch, a loose connection of a number of outlaws all centered around 5 men. Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, Ben Kilpatrick, Will Carver, and Kid Curry. Right when the West was becoming less forgiving, they were at the height of their power. They weren't scraping by or running scared. They were pulling off major robberies and getting away with them over and over. Their names were known, their crimes were followed, their success made them arrogant. But by the fall of 1900, that arrogance was riding right alongside them, and it was about to collide with a small railroad town in northern Nevada. For the Wild Bunch, success had started to feel routine. The risk felt manageable, even predictable. This carried the gang into Winnemucca. September 19th, 1900, 3 men walk into the First National Bank right here and walk out with over $32,000 in gold. It was one of the largest robberies the Wild Bunch had ever carried out. And even now, history can't say with certainty which 3 members were inside that bank. What is clear is how exposed the job was. It was a broad daylight robbery. Clerks and customers got a clear look at the men who did it, faces people remembered, and details people talked about. The Wild Bunch rode out of town, but this time, they didn't leave as ghosts. A short time after the Winnemucca robbery, the Wild Bunch found themselves in Fort Worth, right in the middle of Hell's Half Acre. 15 blocks of saloons, gambling halls, and brothels packed tight against Main Street. They had stolen cash and gold coin to burn. And at some point, between the drinks and the debauchery, they cleaned themselves up. Suits and derby hats replaced dusty clothes from the trail. And for reasons that were probably casual, maybe alcohol, maybe boredom, they decided to have a photograph taken. The photograph showed the group clearly. The Sundance Kid, Ben Kilpatrick, and Butch Cassidy seated up front, Will Carver and Kid Curry standing behind them. It wasn't meant to be a statement. It was just a picture between friends who just so happened to be outlaws. After the sitting, the gallery's owner, John Schwartz, made at least one copy and hung it openly in his main gallery. Not long after, a local detective saw the photo and sent it to the Pinkerton National Detective Agency office in Denver. According to the Pinkerton case notes, it was their first real break. Using the photograph as a starting point, Pinkerton identified the members of the Wild Bunch, confirmed their aliases, and gathered photographs and detailed descriptions. Those materials were compiled into circulars and sent to law enforcement agencies across the United States. By May 15, 1901, Pinkerton detectives issued a new circular featuring the faces of Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and Kid Curry. The Wild Bunch's keepsake became a working case file. Once the circulars went out, robberies that once had been treated as isolated jobs were now being re-examined as part of a larger operation. Witnesses' descriptions mattered, timelines were aligned, associations hardened. Pinkerton files began following movements instead of rumors. Local law enforcement now had faces and names to match against men passing through town. For the first time, photographs and descriptions weren't sitting in an isolated town file. They were being collected, compared, and shared through centralized rogues galleries. The Wild Bunch were no longer being chased piecemeal, they were being tracked as a group. Although their reign didn't end overnight, it fractured them. Will Carver was killed in 1901 during a shootout with lawmen in Sonora, Texas. Ben Kilpatrick, the tall Texan, was captured in 1901, served 10 years in prison, and was later killed during a botched robbery in 1912. Kid Curry, the most violent of the group, died by his own hand in 1904 after a shootout with lawmen. And by 1904, only Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid remained at large in South America, but distance no longer offered protection. In 1909, Cassidy and Sundance were killed in San Vicente after a gun battle with Bolivian military police. The photograph didn't end the Wild Bunch by itself. It did something just as important. It taught law enforcement how to hunt outlaws going forward. That catching criminals wasn't about chasing legends anymore, but about collecting information and connecting crimes, men, and movement. And once that happened, the era of anonymous outlaws was over.